On the night of December 6th, 1991, an Austin police officer was driving his patrol route through a quiet shopping center when he noticed something wrong. Orange flames were flickering through the windows of an "I can't believe it's" yogurt shop. He radioed for firefighters and rushed toward the building. When the crews extinguished the blaze and pushed through the smoke-filled interior, they made a discovery that would haunt Austin, Texas for over 3 decades. Inside the burned-out yogurt shop were 4 bodies. All of them were teenage girls. All of them had been shot execution-style in the head, and all of them were completely naked, their hands bound behind their backs with their own clothing. Keep that detail in mind, because 34 years later, when a determined detective finally cracked this case, that signature would be the key to identifying one of America's most prolific serial killers. But before we dive into today's story, if you love complex cold cases and decades-long investigations told through immersive, detailed storytelling, then you're exactly where you need to be. Because that's my specialty, and I upload fresh stories 3 to 4 times every week. So if that interests you, please tie up the like button with its own underwear and leave it in a burning building. Also, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future uploads. All right, let's get into today's story, which takes place in Austin, Texas, beginning on December 6th, 1991. The 4 girls who died that night were Amy Ayers, just 13 years old, Eliza Thomas, 17, and sisters Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, 17 and 15. 2 of them, Jennifer and Eliza, had been working the closing shift at the yogurt shop that Friday evening. It was a typical shift in a typical shopping center. Around 9:30 that night, Amy and Sarah showed up to hang out with their friends and wait for them to finish closing up. The plan was simple. The girls would lock up the shop, clean the counters, count the cash register, and head home. Nobody knows exactly when the killer entered. Investigators believe he either came in just before closing time and hid, or he forced his way through the back door as the girls were cleaning. What happened next was unspeakably brutal. The killer bound all 4 girls with their own underwear and clothing, gagging them to keep them quiet. He forced them to the back of the shop. He sexually assaulted at least one of them. Then, methodically and coldly, he shot each girl in the head with a small caliber weapon. After executing all 4 teenagers, he poured an accelerant throughout the store and set it ablaze, hoping to destroy any evidence of his crimes. Then he walked out into the Texas night and vanished. When firefighters discovered the bodies shortly before midnight, the scene was catastrophic. The fire had raged hot enough to char the victims beyond easy recognition. The water used to fight the flames had destroyed much of the potential evidence. The Austin Police Department immediately assembled a massive task force. The FBI was called in. The case became one of the largest investigations in Texas history. Detectives chased down thousands of leads. They interviewed over 1,200 potential suspects. They collected hundreds of DNA samples. Tips poured in from across the country, including multiple false confessions. People wanted this case solved. Austin was a relatively peaceful city in 1991, and this crime shattered the community's sense of safety. Parents stopped letting their teenagers work late shifts. The case became known simply as the Yogurt Shop Murders, and it haunted everyone who lived through it. For years, the investigation went nowhere. Then, in 1999, 8 years after the murders, police arrested 4 young men. Their names were Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. All 4 had been teenagers at the time of the killings. During intense interrogations, 2 of them, Springsteen and Scott, confessed to participating in the murders. Springsteen was convicted and sentenced to death row. Scott was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. It seemed like the case was finally closed. But here's where it gets worse. The confessions were almost certainly false, coerced during aggressive interrogation tactics. And there was one massive problem. DNA evidence collected from the crime scene didn't match any of the 4 convicted men. Not even close. The DNA belonged to someone else entirely. In 2006, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Springsteen's conviction, ruling his trial was unfair. In 2009, after nearly a decade behind bars, both Springsteen and Scott were released. The charges were dropped. The real killer was still out there, and 2 innocent men had spent 10 years in prison for crimes they didn't commit. One of them had been on death row. The case went cold again. The DNA profile sat in databases for years with no matches. Families of the victims tried to move forward with their lives while carrying the unbearable weight of knowing their daughter's killer was free. Then, in 2022, a detective named Daniel Jackson was assigned to Austin Police Department's cold case unit. His supervisor called him into the office on his very first day and gave him a specific assignment: solve the yogurt shop murders. Jackson dove into the evidence with fresh eyes and new technology. He started methodically reviewing every piece of physical evidence collected from the scene. In June 2025, Jackson pulled out a spent shell casing from a .380 caliber pistol that had been found in a floor drain at the yogurt shop. This casing had been tested years earlier, but ballistics technology had improved dramatically. Jackson submitted it to the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, a federal database that stores images of bullet casings to link crimes across jurisdictions. In July, the system got a hit. The casing matched another unsolved murder, this one in Kentucky. Jackson contacted Kentucky investigators and discovered eerie similarities between the cases. Victims tied with their own clothing, sexual assault, extreme violence. They were dealing with the same killer. Jackson also reached out to every DNA lab in the country that specialized in YSTR testing, a type of analysis that examines Y chromosome DNA passed from father to son. He asked if any of them could manually search their databases against the unknown profile from the yogurt shop. Only one lab responded with a match. The South Carolina State Crime Lab had a YSTR profile on file from a 1990 rape and murder in Greenville, South Carolina. The profile belonged to a man named Robert Eugene Brashers. Jackson started digging into Brashers' history, and what he found was chilling. Brashers was a documented serial killer and rapist who'd left a trail of terror across multiple states between 1990 and 1998. In 1985, he'd been convicted of attempted murder after shooting a woman in the head. He served only 3 years of a 12-year sentence before being released in 1989. After his release, he went on a multi-state killing spree. He strangled a woman in South Carolina in 1990. He raped a 14-year-old girl in Memphis in 1997, controlling and tying up 4 women at once. He shot and killed a mother and her adult daughter in Missouri in 1998, and his methodology was consistent across all these crimes. He worked alone. He carried multiple weapons. He tied his victims with their own clothing. He was capable of controlling multiple victims simultaneously. In 1999, Brashers died by suicide during a standoff with police in Missouri, shooting himself with a .380 caliber pistol. Jackson's investigation revealed something stunning. On December 8, 1991, just 2 days after the yogurt shop murders, Brashers was stopped at a Border Patrol checkpoint between El Paso, Texas and Las Cruces, New Mexico. He was driving a stolen car from Georgia. and he was carrying a .380 caliber pistol, the same make and model weapon used to kill Amy Ayers, the same gun he would later use to kill himself. Ballistics testing showed the gun matched casings from the yogurt shop, from the Kentucky murder, and from his final crimes in Missouri. Brashers had been in Austin. He'd killed the 4 girls. Then he'd fled west toward the border, was briefly detained and released, and continued his killing spree across the country for 7 more years. Jackson had one final piece of evidence to test. Amy Ayers' fingernail clippings from her autopsy had been preserved for over 3 decades. Unknown male DNA had been detected under her nails years earlier, but testing it would consume the sample entirely. It was now or never. On September 15, 2025, Jackson submitted the clippings for direct comparison against Brashers' DNA profile. The results came back on September 26th. They matched. Statistical analysis showed it was 2.5 million to 1 that the DNA under Amy's fingernails belonged to Robert Eugene Brashers. He was their killer. On September 29, 2025, Austin Police Chief Lisa Davis held a press conference to announce the breakthrough. Standing beside her were the families of all 4 victims, some of whom had waited 34 years for this moment. Sonora Thomas, Eliza's sister, spoke through tears about finally knowing the truth. Barbara Ayers Wilson, mother of Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, said all they ever wanted was the truth, not vengeance. Bob Ayers, Amy's father, pinned a memorial button reading, "We will not forget," onto Detective Jackson's suit jacket. The Travis County District Attorney addressed the 4 men who'd been wrongfully convicted, acknowledging that the overwhelming evidence now pointed to 1 man's guilt and 4 men's innocence. The case had destroyed lives in multiple directions. 4 innocent teenagers were murdered. 2 innocent men spent a decade in prison, and countless families were left devastated by a serial killer who slipped through the cracks of the justice system. Robert Eugene Brashers killed himself in 1999, so he'll never face trial for the yogurt shop murders. But his identification brings closure to a case that haunted Austin for over 3 decades. Detective Daniel Jackson's persistence, combined with advances in DNA technology and ballistics databases that didn't exist in 1991, finally gave the families answers. The case inspired federal legislation, the Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act, signed by President Biden in 2022, which helps ensure cold cases get reviewed with the latest technology. An HBO documentary series about the murders premiered in September 2025, just weeks before Brashers was identified. The 4 girls, Amy, Eliza, Jennifer, and Sarah, are finally getting justice. And their story stands as proof that even after decades of dead ends and devastating mistakes, the truth can still emerge from the ashes. So that's gonna do it. Until next time, see ya.